So the majority of you have touched a fly rod before. And then those that have done some saltwater fishing, outstanding. And generally, years experience, 1 to 3 years, and 3 to 5, and beyond that, you probably don't need me. Then again, those are the people that need me the most. Unfortunately, if you're a golfer, golfers, good golfers, they have a swing coach, and they're working constantly on their swing. Well, a cast is a lot like that. It's a very natural movement. It's a very easy movement. It doesn't require a lot of work. The more we do, the more we screw up the cast. The more we can be zen-like and let the rod be the rod and the line be the line, we're going to do good. Obviously, you want a good setup. How familiar are people with lines? Let's ask this question. Right now, who's fishing like a redfish or a bonefish or a permit or a tarpon type line? It says on the box, we say redfish, quick shooter, bonefish, flats pro. All those lines today, in this world today, are basically shooting heads. They have, and a lot of them, Rio's marketing is, they took the color of this head, see how the color changes right there? And they added, that might be blue. Then they added a short orange section. The price of fly lines went up from $89 to $130. And they call that a handling section. It means no difference. It doesn't change at all. It's part of the rear taper. It is as it is. All these lines were never like this. These lines have a very skinny running line. Some are skinnier than others. And they have a shorter head. You notice this head here is about 35, 36 foot long. And then you have your leader on top of that. I'm just going to straighten it out here. So that right there, what's laying on the ground right now is the head of the fly line. Head of the fly line has a front taper. So it starts out small, it tapers back to a little larger diameter where it carries more mass and weight. And the shorter the front taper is, the more inclined it is to be able to turn over larger flies. The presentation will suffer because the longer that front taper is, the better your presentation is going to be, but you also lack in being able to turn over a lot larger flies. So having the right line is important. Right now, the rave in all the manufacturers is they're trying to make it easier for us. Back in when saltwater really started taking off, say early 90s, late 80s, fly lines were still basic weight forward, basic double taper. They were still making level lines at that point. Not many people were using them. And then what happened was the lines started getting heavier. Few authors wrote in their books about overlining your rod. So every rod manufacturer was out there going, we need to build a faster rod, super extra fast, like moon shuttle fast. And then the manufacturers that are building lines were making their heads heavier and heavier and heavier. All rods are rated by the American Tackle Manufacturers Association. I forget what the acronym is. Should be able to figure that out. The American Tackle Manufacturers Association, they're all rated based on how they will yield. They hang them on a wall, they hang a weight on the end, wherever it bends to. I'm sure you've been on YouTube or something, or saw it in a magazine, and they bend to a certain point. That weight varies in length, in weight, depending on the line sizes. Years ago, we never had a lot of 14, 15, 16, 17 weight fly lines. And they came in vogue with big game saltwater fishing. We never had a 0 before. We never really had much of a 1 or a 2, in all honesty. A 3 was about as super light, like that little bamboo rod that I have there, that you were ever going to see. Then Orvis came out with, Orvis came out with it, but Sage was the first one who got it to market, a 0 weight fly rod. Never really understood that one. But basically, the weight and grains of the first 30 feet of the fly line, so that's that head we talked about. That first 30 feet, the weight and grains, every line number, 1, 2, 3, 4, all the way up to 15, 16, 17, has a designated weight that's supposed to stay the same. Manufacturers kind of threw that out the window for lines. Rod manufacturers, on the other hand, started building rods based on that scale. Few authors started writing articles and books saying, you want to be a better caster, you need a heavier fly line to load your rod deeper to get more out of you, so you can get the line out. It's like you put a 1 ounce sinker on your spinning rod versus a 1/4 ounce sinker. Obviously, you're going to be able to throw it farther, right? Because the weight carries the lure. Well, the fly line carries the fly. but it gets its energy from this line speed. So if I'm doing this, not seeing a whole lot happen there, it doesn't have a lot of energy in it, I'm just making big floppy casts. The line is traveling out there. Not very efficient, is it? I mean, yeah, it seems like it because the line's, traveling there. But the goal is to create line speed. Line speed comes from this rod loading, storing energy, and then unloading, bending and unbending. And when it releases that energy back into the line, it creates line speed. So, kind of looks like this. Yes? It's all right, you're fine. Give me a yell, kick me in the hiney, and I'll stop. Oh, okay. Where was I? So line speed. When you're casting, and a lot of your trout fishermen, general casting anywhere, most of the videos you're supposed to see to this day, this is what you see. Don't worry about loop side right now. I'm just crossing in the vertical plane. So basically I'm casting this way. Well, not a lot of line speed. Much more line speed than a sailing boat. Much more line speed. Line speed comes from the rod bending, the stroke that you have. The stroke is the distance your hand moves in the cast. The arc is the distance the rod moves from stop to stop. There's a stop in the back cast and a stop in the forward cast.
I was trying to get up where I can't see.
The goal is to create a pretty tight loop. That loop will unroll before it takes this line out of my hand. Carries it. The distance of this, or height of this loop, from here to here. Can everybody see that okay? You stand up if you need to, or come up a little closer. Is determined on how far the rod travels to a stop from 12 o'clock. So I'm just going to bring that rod up here. My tightest loops are going to be if I stop that rod relatively close to 12 o'clock. That's the general consensus. I'm going to prove that wrong in a little bit. But, so if I have 12 o'clock here and I bring the rod all the way down to here. So basically I'm doing this. See what happens again? No real loop. I've moved it to a really long arc. I got a pretty long stroke, but I'm not really getting a good cast. My goal is, and we got grass here. My goal is to get a cast that looks more like this. That's going to have a tighter loop, and it's going to travel a little smoother through the line. Now you notice the line speed's a lot heavier, a lot faster. My stroke is also a lot shorter. I'm not doing this over to here. When we make a big cast, so I have a big, and that would be a pretty big loop. That is a direct result. You can see how much longer this axis is right now. That's determinant on where that rod tip stopped based on 12 o'clock again. But it all has to do with the rod traveling, rod tip in particular, the tip of that rod traveling in a straight line throughout its arc. So remember again, arc is here to here, or it could be here to here. Everything in between, very tight to very big. The goal is if the rod is being loaded and the rod is bent when it's loaded, that there's a rule of thumb, and that rule of thumb is short cast, small or short arc, arc is going to be tight, and your stroke is going to be small. So, and the pause that you have at the end of the cast will be short. So, short cast, short arc, short stroke, short pause. And that looks like this. I'm going to have a short line out here right now. It doesn't take too long for the pause part is about the line unrolling. So when I stop the rod, see how long it takes for that to unroll? Stop. I don't want to just immediately start going forward. I haven't given a chance for that line to straighten out behind me. The goal is to have as much mass outside the rod, still traveling at speed before you change direction. So that's what the pause part is. So short cast, short arc. Everything is right in here. Just really small. My stroke is almost non-existent, right? Not a ton of wrist. We don't want to rotate too much in the cast. This is rotation. You see, as the moment I start rotating, that cast gets much bigger. And we're going to keep it in a plane. So if you notice that butt stays closer to my arm, I understand the line's kind of flopping out there. You just got to watch that truck. stays closer to my arm. The moment I start rotating, what happens? It just opens up completely, right? It's not no longer all that rotating back. That'll often make you very tired, give you tendonitis, do a lot of things that don't work really well. The longer your cast is, that's one back cast, 70 feet, boom, slides right up. The longer your cast is, the longer your stroke is going to be, the wider or longer your arc is going to be. And your pause is going to increase, because guess what? It takes longer, 1, 2, 3, before you can send that line back in that opposite direction. Crap, cast anyway. Casting on the grass is always a challenge. So getting back to line speed means a whole lot. You can sit here, get very close to the ground, not touch the water, keep that line speed up, get underneath the wind and make the cast. But you notice my tempo increases considerably. My arc hasn't changed much, my stroke hasn't changed much, but the line speed is increased exponentially. So the weight of the line times the speed of the line creates the energy to carry that fly to where you're trying to cast it. We have, in saltwater, we run the gambit. You can have very tiny flies, little shrimp and crab patterns, bonefish flies, little crazy charlies and gotchas and stuff, almost like a trout fly. And then you get into much bigger stuff. The big stuff requires you to have more weight up front and more line speed to be able to throw. Another component of casting bigger flies is leader selection. We'll talk about that after. So speed of the line, weight of the line, rods. As I talked before, going backwards a little bit, manufacturers started building lines that were heavier than what the rating is for. So how does that relate to the rod? It takes that super ultra fast rod that you paid $1,000 for, and it turns it into a noodle because it's got all this weight it's got to move. Here, do me a favor and just stand on that line for a second. So right now, there's a fair amount of yield right there. This is considered a really fast rod. And I've got some tension on it. You're not going to see that in casting necessarily, but the goal is, if you watch here, as I come back through the casting stroke, the tip stays in the same place, and that would be the end of the cast. As soon as I stop that rod, that loop is going to form. That loading that I have on here right now is what's carrying that. But when you add more weight up front by buying a number 8, and I don't want to name manufacturers, but I will, a fly line of a weight forward 8, like this redfish line, it probably weighs close to a 9. That could be as much as 80 to 100 grains more. And that's a lot. And then that time your line speed. Now if you're casting like this, which is the way I think the intention was by them, you're going to sit here and just going to, remember how I was just throwing out line? Not really a cast, but you're moving the fly. That's what that weight is going to end up doing to you. It's going to open up that cast. The rod isn't going to be able to respond quickly to your cast, and you're going to lose a lot of performance. You won't have the line speed to cut through the wind. You won't have the line speed to carry bigger flies. And so my best recommendation to all of you is, if you can buy a line that's as closely related, even if it means underlining, because there are lines now that are 1.5 times heavier than the rated size. So if you're buying an 8, you're actually getting a 9.5. You're buying a 9 or a 10, they go up proportionally. The only place that changes is with the two-handed spay rods. There's an 8 weight sitting there that has a 575 grain head on it. It's 70 feet long. This is only 35, right? But that 575 comes in the first 30 feet. So you look at it, it's like rope, but they call it an 8 weight. Well, spay rods, two-handers, are generally 3 line sizes heavier than what the rating on the rod is for. But they work together on that so far. You need to have that weight or you'll never be able to cast that rod. Not to mention you won't be able to throw the heavy heads, the brass flies, the tungsten beads, all the other things that they do to get down deep to catch salmon. And so they definitely have a place in saltwater as well.